Today's episode is going to be about your favorite topic, subject matter experts, and how to make your relationship with them pay at all levels. Boom.
You're here because you want more engagement, more delight, more fun, more learning. You're hungry for change and willing to take action.
If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original.
Welcome to the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Let's take learning to the next level.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to another podcast episode with Anna Sabramowitz, your host. I'm drinking tea today. You might hear a little bit of this teacup clanging because, it's a fancy teacup and it's got a plate. All business all the time. That's right. Okay. And I will slurp during this podcast, so don't get disgusted. It's only tea. Okay. Subject matter experts. Hot topic. You know what? It's been a hot topic for like forever. And to prepare for today's podcast, I was thinking about, subject matter experts, getting you guys some fun quotes. And have you ever read that book, Think and Grow Rich? It's by Napoleon Hill. And what Napoleon Hill did in that book, you're supposed to discover the goal of how to think and grow rich for yourself. He's not going to tell you the secret. But let me tell you the secret's in the title, Think and Grow Rich. And I was thinking about how Napoleon Hill himself, you could consider him a subject matter expert on millionaires because that's what he did. He went around for that book, which I believe was his bestseller, and he interviewed and followed men who were at that time, well, by our standards, probably like gazillionaires, right? And I thought about the fact that he was a subject matter expert, but he was not himself, let's say, a millionaire. I believe he did achieve success several times, but it was easy come, easy go for him. He either married the wrong woman and she took all of his money, although one of them really did help him write that book, I believe. And then so it was like rags to riches like 3 or 4 times for that guy. So it didn't necessarily make him a top performer. Although one of the things that came out of that research, and I have read that book, and I feel it's one of those books that you got to like read every year. You know, do you have that book that you read every year? Because every year you're a different person, and every year it adds something a little more to your life, or you see its lessons in a different and a better way. I feel like that's something that I've actually discovered recently, that I've read books, and then when I go back to them and read them again, one, I really don't realize how much I've forgotten, and 2, that the lessons there are now, I'm ready for them. It's almost like that quote, the teacher appears when the student is ready. So one of the things that he said, there was these quotes from him, he really believed in the idea that it doesn't matter how many awesome books you read or how awesome the knowledge that you get is. He really talked about if you don't have a vision for yourself, if you don't have a belief in what you want to achieve, then without that strong goal, it doesn't matter what you're doing. And I thought about, why do I do what I do? And why do I share the things that I share? And why am I doing a podcast? All those things. And I thought about that. One of the things that drives me is putting together work that I'm super proud of. And I've done this. I've put together projects where I feel like I could go back and I could make them better, but you can do that with every single project, right? You could just say, it wasn't, I could go back 15 more times. There's iterations. I wish we could do that. Sometimes you can't. But to put something out there that doesn't represent you in the best way, it feels horrible, not necessarily because you're like, my name's attached to that and it's not as awesome as I wanted to make it. A part of it is that in the moment, you know you could do better, but there's all this pressure or limitations that sometimes are self-constrained, or sometimes are influences that come to us from people who don't understand how good something can be if just the right amount of tweak or different perspective was taken. And I feel like if I can help somebody else have the guts to speak up and say, no, I'm the expert here. And what does an expert mean? An expert sometimes means that you've simply done, 10 hours more research and exploration than somebody else, or that it simply is your area of your domain of passion, your domain of interest, and you've been able to look at examples that are awesome. So when you come into some kind of meeting where somebody's saying we need e-learning, you can say, listen, I know what great e-learning looks like. I've been a student of great e-learning, and let's follow my lead because I know what I'm talking about. The rest of you are domain experts in your own domains, whether that's human resources, whether that's technical writing, whatever that is. Own that, but don't tell me how to do my job, because I have great ideas and I'm going to lead this initiative. And I feel like we're not doing that enough, because there isn't a community of like peer review kind of practitioners where you can say, listen, I went and I talked to, 100 of my peers. I've seen awesome examples and we've talked about why they work. These are sound, instructionally designed sound models, and I'm going to use them. And this is what I recommend. So my vision is to create that community where we are all super comfortable giving each other honest feedback and creating things that we are proud of. And I'm not talking about it has to win awards, or although that's always great. But I know a lot of awards are attached to, does my company have the money and the time to invest in putting that award submission in, versus do we care about when this goes out that people are actually saying, man, that changed my life, or that was so good. I couldn't, like, one of the best things that's ever come back is, as far as me launching an e-learning module, is somebody saying, I actually went through it more than once because I really enjoyed the thinking process, and I wanted to see what would happen if I made a different decision, if there was a different outcome. To me, that is like getting that's an award. That is the award. Tea time. Okay. So let's get back to this SME, subject matter expert conversation. And it's kind of odd. I mean, I really like working with subject matter experts. One of the things that I think there's this misconception is that if you talk to enough subject matter experts, you become an expert yourself. And that's kind of ridiculous because, like, I had this, what my boss once said, hey, there's, we're putting on this workshop and you work with these people who are subject matter experts in this field. Do you want to put the workshop together with them? And I'm like, well, why would I be a part of that workshop? They're subject matter experts. They put on these workshops on their own. And they're like, well, haven't you gleaned some information from them by working with them for all this time on this specific project? And I was like, yeah, but that's all, that's like 1% of what they actually know. And the things that we've been developing have been for a specific audience at a specific time. So there's no way that I could in any way run a workshop on this specific topic. And I think that's kind of the one of the things that's assumed is that by us hanging out or having a couple of conversations or working on a project about, laser, guns, that all of a sudden we're laser gun experts. And we are not. We are not. And so when people say, oh, I did some research before I talk to the subject matter expert, I do a little bit of research. So I'm kind of, so they can tell that I don't know, so that I don't come into that meeting with this, with this idea that I don't know anything about their domain. And that's just, to me, so presumptuous for you to pretend like you can come into let's say a manufacturing area. You're a trainer or you're an instructional designer, and all of a sudden, by reading a little bit about what they do, that you're actually on par with their level and you can actually ask educated questions. No, it's not possible. I'm sorry, it's not. And to believe that and to expect that of people is actually, I think, quite ridiculous as well. And I used to work for companies that sold tires. I would never pretend that I knew, like, the training that was being designed was for people who were going to be selling those tires on the tire floor. And some of those salespeople potentially would be the mechanics that would be installing them later, but those roles are usually separate. But I would never, even after putting together 50 modules on how to sell different tires depending on the traction, I would never actually assume that I could do those things by myself without a subject matter expert. Because one, I'd never been on a show floor. I'd never even, looked at the grain of the tire myself, smelt it, none of those things. I was never in that environment. So for me to pretend that I would probably make me assume certain things that were not true, and therefore the context of whatever I was putting together would be completely lost. And that's one of the things I actually want to talk about, because I think that there's a difference between somebody who is an expert, quote unquote, subject matter expert, versus somebody who's a top performer. And I don't think that the person who's always a subject matter expert, I don't think those are always people who have ever been top performers. I think those are people who are good at remembering things and saying what, and not always, but those are people who are good at remembering why things are, what the procedures are. But have they ever actually hustled to become the top salesperson? Have they ever hustled to become a team leader or led through example? So I'm just saying that we cannot assume that the person who knows the most about a topic, like let's say Napoleon Hill knows the most about millionaires, that they are also the top performer. In this case, did he ever himself become a millionaire and actually hold on to his money? Those are two different domains. And I think that difference can actually be something that we need to consider when we're developing learning for the people that we're developing the learning for. I'll maybe return to that later. Actually, I know I will, because it's one of the things that I always think about. So, one of the things that comes up, one of the questions is, how do I keep a subject matter expert focused on what I need? And, you're like, oh, this person is so busy. I get it. Like, they have a real job. And you have your job, and you're trying to almost say, hi, my job's also important, and I'm trying to do it. Can you give me your time? And by the way, you're probably not going to get paid any extra for it so I could do my job better. And I really feel like that's what you have to approach this thing with, is saying they're full-time committed to something else. How can I make this easy for them? And one of the things I find that to me is just completely baffles my mind is when people say, yeah, my subject matter expert doesn't understand e-learning. Who cares? They're not supposed to. They're a subject matter expert in their domain. That's like them complaining that you don't understand what they're talking about. It's up to you to ask those questions because you're trying to create training. If they don't understand e-learning, it's like saying when the guy who's going to come in and like install your new dishwasher or something in your house or do some sort of electrical work, if he gets frustrated if you don't understand how currents and voltage work. You hired him to do the job, and he's a domain expert, and you just tell him what you want. He'll ask you where you want the socket or when you want the appliance installed, and he does his job without trying to somehow impose on you that you don't understand his domain. Why do we expect our subject matter experts Why is there this expectation that they need to understand that? And I think that I know that. I think the reason we expect them to understand is because if we're unclear about what the heck we're producing, then somehow it becomes their issue because we didn't ask the right questions. So I need us to turn that around. And I mean, that's something that one of the things I used to do is I used to say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep my subject matter expert. I'm going to show them all this stuff up front. I'm going to show them all these examples of awesome e-learning, what we're going to do so that when they come to that meeting, by the way, they're slammed, right? And I'm sending them all this stuff to actually get them prepped for my meeting. I'm preparing them for this meeting to enter this software project. Oh my God, how overwhelming already, right? So this is what I used to do. And I thought, of course, the minute that they see this stuff, the minute they see the software, they're going to get it. They're somehow going to get. One, they're going to be so happy because they get to be a part of it. Wow, lucky you. Two, they're going to see all the way a scenario works. So this is so presumptuous of me. I used to send people scenarios. I used to send subject matter experts to, let's say, broken coworker and say, look at this. This is what we're going to be building. And somehow, because I don't know why, I just thought, they work in my realm or they know what e-learning is or they've seen what e-learning is, that they're going to get the process of when I start asking them questions, they're going to somehow be like, oh yeah, broken coworker. That was a story-driven, scenario-based kind of learning. And I'm just going to come up with all these awesome stories and scenarios for you to use in your own learning. Great. Not happening. It's almost the overwhelm of something so new for a lot of people is just, it doesn't help you create, it doesn't help them produce, it doesn't help you create anything. And in fact, I almost feel like that's completely unnecessary. Because I'm thinking that if I was creating, if I met a subject matter expert or a top performer, and all I wanted to do is get from them the specific stories and details that would make would help me produce e-learning that help people practice those masterful skills, I would not necessarily even show them what e-learning looks like. Consider this. Let's say you're developing a scenario e-learning. You're designing scenario e-learning, and your goal is to teach, let's say, your target audience how to make a perfect pie. And if they, their goal is to, let's say, based on a certain recipe, select the right sequence of how they're going to execute those events, and then make certain decisions, whether to whip the eggs or leave them as is, all kinds of stuff. And then based on that, they can see the consequences of their actions. The pie burnt, the pie flopped, the pie came out raw. Now, if my subject matter expert is a 92-year-old grandma who's been the top baking champ for the past, 30 years, does she need to know what the e-learning module is going to look like? No. Does she need to know what e-learning is? No. She just needs to know if we mix the eggs this way, what's the outcome? And if we mix the eggs this way with whatever flour, what's the outcome? All she needs to be is an expert in her field. And if I say, well, what about this? She's going to know immediately what the outcome's going to be. The pie's going to burn. The pie's going to come out raw. That's what I want us to do, is just remove the pressure from the SME about learning about our project, about involving them in creating a software development project for them, because they don't need to do that. They actually can just focus on being the expert and being able to tell us if somebody messes up, why are they messing up, and what is that factor that contributed to that mess up? What is that? So let's in some cases, let's just let them be the expert in their domain without putting this stuff on them. Okay. So I gotta warm up my tea here. All right. And I don't know if you drink tea. Totally gonna go off the side here, but I'm from a family of tea drinkers, and we used to have a lot of sugar in our tea as well. And it took me forever to wean myself off of sugar and tea. And then I realized how beautiful tea can be and how aromatic. And so I drank it out of those big coffee mugs. And then one day I thought I would go a little fancy and get myself one of those teacups that kind of opens up. It's like a bowl, but a teacup, and it's very, very light. And what happens is you realize that because it's open, there's more of a surface area at the top, you get more aroma. And so now you can really tell the difference between teas, and also just the fact that you're getting so much more aroma with your tea. It's kind of cool. It's amazing how much I didn't realize, how a wine glass or the type of glass can affect the type of alcohol that you're putting in as far as a cocktail and things like that. How martini glasses, there's a reason why martini glass is shaped the way it is versus a snifter versus a wine glass. But the same thing happens with tea. It's like, get this, the container actually has an effect on the experience. Isn't that neat? That might be another podcast. Ha ha ha. All right. So another thing that I want you to consider when it comes to subject matter experts is that if somebody's a domain expert, that does not make them automatically a good teacher. Have you ever had somebody who's actually a great teacher? They're sometimes not the most knowledgeable person, let's say. They become one over time because teaching other people actually helps you refine your own knowledge and your own ideas. But I find people who are domain experts, they're not necessarily the best teachers. And the reason is, not off the start, because I think the reason is that they've already... When you become an expert, and you've probably heard of this this concept before, it's called the curse of knowledge, right? So what happens in the curse of knowledge is that you are you're so far down the path of mastery that you forgot what it was like to be new. So you forgot all the mistakes, all the questions, or the doubts, all the trials and errors that you had to go through to get to where you are. So, and the analogy I always use for this is that I just recently as an adult, learned how to drive a car. And it wasn't that I learned to drive a car just recently, because I'd been driving for a very long time. I finally got my driver's license, the official one, so I could drive by myself like a big girl. And then, but what happened is that I actually didn't know all the steps that went into backing out a car. And so for me, especially when you're being assessed with a person there beside you, all of a sudden you become aware of all your gaps. And for me, there were moments where you're completely overwhelmed because there is about to me, it seemed 100 different things you have to do, let's say, to back out a car. Know where the end is, know where to look. And so those things, so for me to back out a car is, let's say, 35 different steps. And for somebody who is, let's say, who has been driving for a very long time, that's a single step. They've taken all those details. That's what a subject matter expert usually does. They've taken all those details and compressed it because it's become automatic for them into a single step. And that's why sometimes subject matter experts, the information they will give you is not necessarily what a novice will need or what you will need. And so when we say, how do we get them to give us what we need, you might say that they don't actually know how to do that because they are so experienced. So there's how do you overcome that? So I think that the way to overcome that is to stop expecting them to give you all of that info. I think what subject matter experts can do is give you stories if you ask for them the right way. They can also give you consequences when somebody takes the wrong step, or consequences of actions. They can actually, like I was talking about that pie earlier, they can probably give you that. Like you could just throw variables at them. They'll be like, yeah, this is what happens. Yeah, this is what will happen. And and even one of the things is not only just immediate effects, but long-term effects of things that people only with that level of expertise could give you, right? So then you can say, okay, I have this in this domain. This subject matter expert has given me some stories, has given me the long-term consequences, but maybe one of the things that they cannot give me is those areas where people make assumptions or mistakes when they're new to this, because people forget those things, and obviously they forget them, because why would you want to remember them? They're already, like, you've already learned the best way. Why keep on remembering why you kept on making that mistake, right? You learned it. So one of the things that you may need to do is to now talk to people who just recently learned that. Like if and that's one of the things it's kind of cool. When I was learning how to drive, they said, you should actually, some of the best teachers for driving, for teaching you how to drive, are people who just learned to drive themselves, because they are still, so fresh with all the resources. They are still, like, I'm shoulder checking like crazy. And a lot of the people that I was driving with, that had been driving with for years, didn't shoulder check, or didn't even tell me that I needed to do that. So now if I was teaching somebody, I'd be like, listen, are you shoulder checking? Like, a lot. So because it's still fresh in my mind. Like, trust me, I think for the first month or two after I got my driver's license, you didn't want to be in the car with me driving, because I'd be telling you all the things all the violations you were making while you were driving, because it was fresh in my mind, right? Now I still notice them. I'm just quiet, because who wants that person in the car with them? So, so you might want to fill that gap with people who are new, who just recently learned that. And then think about also, what you're going to be asking those people maybe a little bit of a different question. So one of the ways to really will help you focus when you talk to these subject matter experts and maybe the new practitioners, you really have to be, it can't be an open-ended conversation. And this is another tip I want to give to you, is you can't go in there with what we say is carte blanche, that whatever they give you, then you're going to start developing activities. There are models for scenarios that work. The models are something like broken coworker. I actually talk about the models that I use in my YouTube videos. So if you want to look those up, like the who's giving the best advice model, you want to always be entering those conversations with a model in your mind, with a toolkit that you're already going to submit. And I know for a lot of people that's like, oh, I want to be creative, or, they look at all those communities that create new things all the time, and you're like, yeah, I want to create something new. But that's fine for like the content. If you want to somehow include content and it's and you want to make it really interesting and beautiful, that's fine. But when it comes down to scenarios, which are, in my opinion, the hardest piece, because you want to make them contextual, you want to make them relevant, you want to make them interesting, and all those things that, that make a great scenario great, which is that they're actually helpful and they help people make decisions, and those are like difficult decisions or whatever. That's what you're trying to get. The content is so easy. You don't need that stuff, right? You can get that anybody can get that. It's the scenarios that make the difference, right? So, and by the way, what you're hearing right now is a coffee grinder in a different part of my house. And so what I'm thinking is that you don't need to show exactly what you're working towards to the subject matter expert or the novice practitioner, but you need to go in there with a model so that the questions you're asking are around what are the mistakes, what are the stories, what are the consequences, what can I do to prevent that, what are some strategies. Those are the things that then you're now asking against a model that when you go away, it's going to be very easy for you to fill out because you worked against that model. You said, okay, tell me several, give me a story about a time when, if you've identified what what the learning is supposed to address, what kind of a behavior issue, saying, when do people usually make a mistake around this area? Tell me a story when this happened, or tell me a story that you've heard of. Because a lot of times the thing is, the subject matter expert doesn't need to have their own aha moments. What if they've heard a story about somebody else's aha moment? If it's contextual enough, it doesn't matter if they don't own that story. It just needs to be a good enough story for that to be helpful to somebody else. So, I think for now I've talked enough about subject matter experts. I could go on, and I will in another podcast, but I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you thought about what I said. Maybe you're already doing these things. That's cool. Let me know. Email me, anna@elearnerengaged.com. And if you have any questions or any other ideas that you think would be interesting to discuss, I would love to hear them. So email me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And
this is the E-Learning Scenario Design Podcast with Anna Sabramowitz.